Hey there. I come here today with a very simple question. That, of course, being, would you let your kids play football? And I ask that for a simple reason, and it's because of the issue in specifically football when it comes to concussions, or I'm sure most of us have heard of CTE, otherwise known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Excuse me, which is to do with repeated head injuries or head trauma or hits to the head, and we see a lot of that in football, which can result in some, well, first off, some pretty nasty hits and pretty nasty shots to the head. Um, so bringing that to awareness nowadays is a great thing. So with that being said, an education on it, the and the seriousness of the impacts of the head, and not just with concussions, because I think we have a misconception that it's just the concussions. It's just those big hits where people pass out or lose consciousness or become dizzy or anything like that. It's just all hits. Any tap to the head like that. But imagine 300 pounders just colliding at the when they're blocking or where they're trying to get past the offensive line, and they're making collision every single time. Those hits impact us too. The brain moves around no matter what through the skull. So as you're constantly getting those big impact hits, or even just impactful hits, we can see some movement in the brain and some trauma through that. Um, as like I said, football tends to get most of the attention when it comes to these to the chronic brain damage, or the CTE that we were just talking about. It does extend way beyond just the game of football. Um, we live now, obviously, in a heightened world of awareness about concussions. We've heard about the dangers that could be caused by the brain, or in the by impacts to the head, to the brain, where the brain kind of just rattles around, possibly in the skull, and all that gets has been is linked recently to degenerative brain diseases, and especially specifically, like I said, to CTE. Um, we've actually in recent years have have come to know some very well known former NFL players who have actually developed CTE, and sadly have taken their lives because of it, because of um, the issues with it, and the problems that they were having because of the brain damage that they had suffered. Um, this has caused, obviously, a massive increase in worry for parents of children who play football, and the effects that concussions can have on their children who play football or want to play football, or have been playing football. It's been there was even a movie that came out called Concussion back in 2015 that was popular, that heightened the concern and the awareness of concussions, and really kind of put the spotlight on the NFL, and changing kind of their protocol and all that. Um, uh, it's there's a lot of research out there, and researchers have been saying that we're kind of just missing the mark because we've been focusing too much on just the concussion aspect of it, but really the root of the problem we've been missing out on. You know, a question to simply ask is, what is CTE, or what is chronic traumatic encephalopathy exactly, and how exactly does one get CTE? Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, chronic traumatic encephalopathy is defined by brain degeneration likely caused by repeated head trauma. So, once again, not just those concussive hits. Head trauma is in this in this definition, like I said, it's not held to just the heavy and violent hits that you see in football, the ones where, like I said, people get knocked out, but just anything that accelerates the skull and causes the brain to rattle around and move around, and you know collide and bounce off the skull. With the concern being on the brain and how it impacts, and the impacts in the head, how they can cause the brain to rattle around, become injured. We got to ask ourselves, how does the brain sit and move inside the skull? Well, The brain actually has 6 layers of protection, which include the skull and also sits in fluid known as cerebral spinal fluid. This causes the brain to almost be suspended and float in the skull. And the fluidity of the brain leaves it kind of susceptible to a lot of movement. Um, in fact, actually, imaging even shows that even a simple left and right rotation, kind of similar to what I'm doing right here, causes the brain to have quite a lot of movement. As we're shifting right, the brain will kind of just shift over. As we come back left, it can kind of, until it just kind of evens out. Um, Concussive hits tend to get the most attention because they are the most serious looking. Um, when you see somebody just pass out, for example. But hits to the head, whether they alter one's state of consciousness or not, are still something to monitor, especially if they are constant or repeated over time. The brain is incredibly delicate, and having it crash into hard skull, you can leave it open to a lot of injuries and bruising and issues that can come about later. Um, and so, follow up question two: once defining it, you gotta ask yourself, well, how do we prevent CTE? Is it diagnosable currently? And unfortunately, CTE is not diagnosable, and actually, the only way that we kind of come to know that it's there, or kind of learn about it, is once the individual has actually passed away. Um, it's brought a great challenge to being able to understand CTE and how it's caused, but also in trying to help those with CTE before they harm themselves worse or take their own lives. Um, it's similar to like the high profile athletes. Out of all the high profile athletes, NFL players diagnosed with CTE, they've all sadly taken their own lives, and it wasn't until after death that we were able to diagnose them with CTE. Um, it's only diagnosable currently upon autopsy of the brain, which obviously makes it a lot harder for us to catch or to study, and to be able to hopefully stop these sad endings. But prevention of CTE comes down to really education, educating ourselves on the brain, on head trauma. For example, like I mentioned, that football gets most of the attention when it comes to CTE or brain trauma. But actually, did you know that according to the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, football is only the second leading cause of concussions among kids 14 years or younger, by half of the first cause. Or I'm sorry, by younger, um, half of what the first cause is, and the first cause being actually bike riding. Um, Football sees about 16,902 concussions. Bike riding saw 34,366 concussions. So, once again, kind of reinforces why helmets are so important, especially with bike riding. So you can see a simple thing like bike riding contributes to more concussions a year than football, and most people in the world don't play football, but we all at one point or another have jumped on a bike and gone for a ride. Um, we all had to learn at some point too, and I'm willing to bet that during that learning process we had a few falls. I'm also willing to safely assume that most of us didn't wear helmets either because they weren't cool, for example, or just never really understood fully the dangers, from a fall and an impact to the head. The point here is simple, and it's education is a key way to prevent this CTE, this injury, this trauma. If we learn to study up on this disease, speak up and advocate for more and better head protection, and suit up by wearing the protection, we can help prevent ourselves and the ones we love from this horrible degenerative brain disease. And one thing I do want to show here real quick is a picture. If I can get it to load here, as I'll show right here as we come across, is in the picture you see on the side right here, which is the normal brain. You can see that corpus callosum in the middle. It's smaller. That's what a normal brain is supposed to look like. And then as you look at the individual with CTE, you can see how the brain is actually smaller. And as you can tell, you see in the middle right there, that corpus callosum, which is where nerves run across and where information is exchanged between the hemispheres. You can see how it's a lot bigger, which can cause a lot of problems and possibly a disconnect between the two brains and how it communicates and runs information. So seeing that, we can see why kind of it would be a little difficult to study the brain. 'Cause you can't really go inside of a brain like that without killing somebody. But basically, brain injuries, whether big or small, is still a brain injury. I know there's a lot of varying degrees of concussions, but a concussion is a concussion simply like that, and a brain injury is a brain injury. And with an organ as delicate as the brain, we should pay attention to any and all head injuries. Period. Just because we don't lose consciousness from a hit, there can still be unseen damage underneath. So, play it smart, protect yourself. And if you do suffer head injury, test your brain as much as you can. The brain is an incredible organ with capacities beyond our full understanding. If it's working that hard for us, we owe it to ourselves to take care of it the best we can. So when it comes to the matter of letting your kids play football, I ask you once again, would you let your kids play football? Thank you.